The room was quiet, unnaturally quiet. This wasn't the stillness of comfort, it was the heavy pause before something seismic, like the air right before thunder cracks open the sky. Everyone in the Senate hearing room felt it, even if they didn't want to admit it. Kamala Harris stepped up to the podium slowly. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor, each step echoing like a ticking clock counting down to something big. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't performing. She was present fully, sharply, dangerously present. Her tailored charcoal gray suit fit perfectly, no flash, no distractions. Her hair was pulled back neatly, eyes focused, with that piercing calm only seen in people who know exactly what they're about to do. She held a slim leather folder in one hand. No entourage, no notes, just that folder and a presence so powerful that it silenced the room without her saying a single word. Around her, the tension was sharp enough to slice through. Senators shifted in their seats, trying to look casual, but their eyes betrayed them. They watched her closely, some curious, some wary, and a few deeply uncomfortable. The Fox News crew sitting in the media pit adjusted their cameras, expecting a standard political speech. Routine, predictable, disposable. They couldn't have been more wrong. Across the aisle, Republican aides whispered among themselves, smirking, trading glances, already preparing snarky tweets and sound bites. They had no idea they were seconds away from losing control of the narrative. One of them, a young aide with slicked back hair and too much confidence, leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Watch this flop." But what none of them realized was this: Kamala Harris wasn't here to speak. She was here to strike. She paused at the podium, glanced once around the room, not to seek approval, but to make sure they were all watching. And they were. Every camera, every eye, every political rival. Every voter glued to a live stream. The silence now was awkward, it was expectant. Because the ones who underestimated Kamala Harris never really understood what power looks like when it's earned through pain and justice and years of being told to sit down and stay quiet. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. And yet somehow she commanded more attention than any firebrand ever could. This wasn't a press briefing. This was a battlefield dressed in marble and velvet. And Kamala wasn't here to survive it. She was here to light the match and burn the lies to the ground. It started with a breath. Kamala Harris leaned slightly toward the microphone. The room leaned with her. What she said next took exactly 93 seconds, but its impact would last for years. Let's stop pretending this is about policy. She began, her voice calm but unwavering. This is about power, about silencing Black and Latino voters, about redrawing maps not to represent, but to erase. You're not defending democracy. You're hijacking it. No shouting, no theatrics. Just a steady, deliberate rhythm that cut through the air like a blade. You call it redistricting, I call it theft. You say election integrity, I say suppression. And when you silence communities of color, when you rig the rules so you can't lose, that's not democracy. That's cheating, and you know it. The room didn't move, the senators didn't breathe, but the damage had been done. Senator Josh Hawley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Senator Ted Cruz looked down at his notes, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. But it was Senator Tom Cotton who stood first. His face was tight, lips pressed, eyes locked on Kamala as if her words had struck a nerve too raw to hide. He turned sharply, gathered his papers, and walked out. Seconds later, 2 more Republicans followed. The cameras caught it all. The silence, the walkouts, the stunned expressions from both sides of the aisle. And then the internet exploded. Within 10 minutes, Kamala was right was trending worldwide. Millions of views, thousands of reactions. Conservative pundits scrambled to twist the narrative, while liberal commentators hailed the moment as a turning point in the electoral war. And through it all, Kamala Harris stood tall, unsmiling, unmoved, because she hadn't said anything radical. She had only said the truth, and the truth had finally landed where it hurt the most. The room didn't move. It was as if time itself had paused, stunned by the weight of Kamala's words. For a moment, no one knew how to react. The senators remained frozen, their expressions tight, unreadable. The staffers on both sides stopped typing. Even the buzzing cameras, which had been whirring quietly in the background, seemed to hold their breath. It was that kind of silence, the kind that doesn't come from stillness, but from shock. The moment after truth strikes. In those few seconds, Kamala Harris stood completely still. Her eyes scanned the room not triumphantly, but steadily, like a surgeon checking her incision. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't slammed her fist. Yet her presence had become the epicenter of a political earthquake. And then the wave hit. The Fox News cameraman zoomed in. CNN flipped their Chiron Harris. This isn't democracy. This is cheating. Producers barked orders through earpieces. Twitter threads exploded with the words, "She said what we were all thinking." Pundits on both sides scrambled to react, some praising her composure, others calling her radical. But no one could deny it. Kamala Harris had seized the moment and flipped the room upside down. And beyond that Senate chamber, something deeper began to stir. In Atlanta, a retired schoolteacher watching the live stream at home whispered, "Finally." In Detroit, a young activist started cutting the clip to post on TikTok. In Oakland, an elderly couple watching from their kitchen table locked eyes and knew they weren't imagining things anymore. For too long, the people had felt invisible, forgotten, redistricted out of their own power. But now someone had spoken directly to them. For them. And that's when the real fight began. Not a fight with fists, not a fight with filibusters, but a fight for the soul of the ballot box and for the voices long erased by politics dressed as policy. Kamala's words had frozen the room, but they had set something else on fire. Donald Trump doesn't confess not directly. He accuses loudly, repeatedly, obsessively. But here's the trick. When Trump points a finger, what he's really doing is holding up a mirror. Every time he shouts fraud, it's because he's already tangled in it. Every time he cries corruption, it's because the scent is too close to home. And when he screams about election interference, it's because he's already at the control panel. For years, this tactic worked. Millions believed him, not because the evidence was strong, but because his rage felt convincing. In a media environment where emotion often beats fact, Trump mastered one thing: weaponized projection. He turned his own wrongdoings into accusations against others. He inverted reality so that up felt like down, and guilt looked like outrage. It's the oldest trick in authoritarian politics: accuse the other side of exactly what you're doing, and do it loudly enough that truth gets drowned in the noise. But Kamala Harris, she wasn't playing that game. She saw through it, and more importantly, she named it. When you silence Black and Latino communities through redistricting and then claim it's about fairness, that's not policy. That's panic. With that single sentence, she shattered the illusion. She didn't just fight back, she exposed the method. And suddenly, Trump's favorite weapon accusation turned on him like a boomerang. Because this time, America was finally paying attention. The lie didn't start on election night. It didn't begin when the results rolled in or when the networks called the race for Joe Biden. It didn't even start with a speech or a lawsuit or a tweet. It started long before the first ballot was cast. Months before the 2020 election, Donald Trump began planting the seed quietly, methodically, dangerously. He hinted at fraud during rallies. He questioned mail and voting on television. He told his followers over and over again that if he lost, it would only be because someone cheated. This wasn't a reaction. This was a setup. It was a strategy built on doubt and fed by repetition. The more he said it, the more it stuck. The lie didn't need to be proven. It only needed to feel possible. The only way they can take this election from us is if it's rigged. Trump, August 2020. That single sentence was more than paranoia. It was a preemptive strike on democracy itself. And it worked. By the time Election Day came, millions of Americans already believed something was off. Not because they saw evidence, but because they had been conditioned. Conditioned to distrust their neighbors. Conditioned to doubt the system. Conditioned to see defeat not as part of democracy, but as a conspiracy. And when Trump lost, the machine was already in motion. Lawsuits, conspiracies, shouted headlines, broken windows at the Capitol. All because the big lie didn't begin with a loss, it began with a plan. A plan to never accept the will of the people unless it bowed to one man. Kamala Harris had seen this kind of story before, not on a campaign trail, but in a courtroom. She'd seen how power rewrites the rules. She'd seen how justice bends not to what is right, but to who holds the gavel. She'd watched over and over again as the system protected itself, even when it meant destroying the people it was supposed to serve. So no, she wasn't surprised by the big lie. She had seen it coming like a slow-moving train, loud, predictable, and devastating if left unchecked. Because Kamala Harris didn't just study injustice, she lived it. As a prosecutor, she sat in rooms where evidence didn't matter as much as influence. She watched young Black men be charged without reason and watched powerful white men walk free without consequence. She saw how institutions used rules not to protect truth, but to protect themselves. And when Donald Trump began planting the seeds of his narrative long before the election, Kamala knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't preparing to run. He was preparing to deny. He was building a bomb and calling it a campaign. And when the results came in and reality didn't serve him, all he had to do was light the fuse. But Kamala, she didn't run from the fire. She waited, she watched, she listened, because she knew something Trump never learned. Timing is everything. You don't waste truth on silence. You wait until the noise is loud enough for the whole country to hear, and then you strike. That's why when she stepped onto that Senate stage, she wasn't reacting. She was executing. And for the first time in a long time, the lie finally had an opponent who wasn't afraid to call it by its name. You don't need to stuff ballot boxes to steal an election. You just need a map and a pencil. Welcome to the quiet crime of American politics, gerrymandering. It doesn't look like fraud. There are no burning ballots, no shady vans, no secret suitcases. There's just a conference room, a few lawmakers, and a redistricting software that can carve democracy into pieces. That's how they do it. Not with guns, not with violence, but with lines on a map, lines that slice through communities, silence voices, and manufacture victories. Let's be clear, gerrymandering is legal. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's cheating that wears a suit and tie. It's voter suppression dressed up as policy. It's the art of choosing your voters before they can choose you. And it's been happening for decades in both parties. But in the last few years, it's become a weapon of surgical precision in the hands of Republican state legislatures. In Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, entire districts have been redrawn, not for fairness, not for balance, but for power. Power that fears young voters, black voters, Latino voters. Power that survives not by persuasion, but by elimination. Kamala Harris knows this. She's seen how maps can be used like knives to cut people out of their own future. And when she stood before the Senate and said, they want to change the system to bend toward the outcome they want, she wasn't speaking in theory. She was speaking from a battlefield most Americans don't even know exists. While other states were carving up maps in back rooms, California made a different move. It punched back in public. At the center of that punch was Governor Gavin Newsom. He didn't hold press conferences with vague promises. He didn't tweet empty outrage. Instead, he launched a direct Democratic offensive, one that would shift the power from politicians to the people. A statewide referendum. One that would give voters, not lawmakers, the final say on redistricting. It was bold, risky, and unprecedented in scale. Because Newsom understood something that many in Washington still pretend not to. You don't beat rigged systems by whispering in hallways. You beat them by exposing them under sunlight. So he made it public. He let the people decide whether California would commit to independent redistricting, a system where lines aren't drawn by partisan operatives, but by citizens. Neutral, transparent, accountable. And here's the twist: they said yes. By a strong majority, Californians voted to take that power out of political hands and place it back into the public's. It was a shockwave. Republicans scoffed at first, calling it political theater. But then they saw the polling. They saw how other blue states started to follow. And they saw how their carefully crafted maps began to look more like sandcastles, vulnerable to waves they couldn't control. Kamala Harris, a former California Attorney General herself, knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a local win. It was a blueprint, a message to every state drowning in gerrymandering. If you can't trust the politicians, trust the people. While the cameras focused on Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris was moving behind the scenes, precisely, patiently, powerfully. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was building a movement. Quiet meetings, strategic phone calls, Zoom briefings with organizers from Georgia to Arizona. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to ignite. Because Kamala knew if California could do it, others could follow. If voters could reclaim power in one place, they could do it everywhere. This wasn't just about winning elections. It was about saving them from manipulation, from suppression, from extinction. This was no longer a policy issue. This was a national emergency. So Kamala called mayors, governors, civil rights lawyers. She rallied black churches in the South, college students in the Midwest, and community organizers in states long written off as too red to care. And one by one, they began to rise. In Pennsylvania, local leaders started pushing for redistricting reform. In Wisconsin, organizers launched a campaign called Draw the Line Fair. In Texas, yes, even Texas communities of color began organizing town halls demanding fair representation. They weren't waiting for Washington. They were following Kamala's lead, not because of who she was, but because of what she stood for. A vote that counts, a voice that matters, a democracy that doesn't just survive, but fights back. What began as a defense of California had now become a national reckoning. Kamala hadn't just supported the movement, she had ignited a fire across the country. And this time it wasn't going to burn out quietly. Her name was Maria Alvarez, a 42-year-old single mother from El Paso, Texas. She worked nights cleaning office buildings and days taking care of her two kids, one in kindergarten and the other in high school. She wasn't political, she wasn't loud, she wasn't radical, but she believed in voting. So when early voting opened, she made arrangements. She called off her second job, asked her cousin to babysit, packed a sandwich, a bottle of water, and drove across town to the only polling place that was still open past 6 p.m. She stood in line for 6 hours. Her feet ached, her back screamed. But she stayed, because this was her voice. This was her shot to say, "I count too." And then just 10 feet from the front of the line, they turned her away. Why? Her driver's license listed a P.O. box instead of a residential address. The law had changed just 2 months earlier. She didn't get the memo, no warning, no second chance, just a cold sentence. "You're not eligible to vote today." Maria didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stood there, stunned, humiliated, in front of strangers, crushed under the weight of a democracy that had just slammed its door in her face. And here's the part that stings: she wasn't alone. That day, over 4,000 voters across Texas were denied for technicalities no one told them about. Most were people of color, most were first-time voters. Most never tried again. And that's the point, because voter suppression doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like bureaucracy. A form, a rule, a minor change, just enough to make someone feel unwelcome. Maria wasn't a statistic. She was a mother, a citizen, a believer in the system. And that day the system told her, "You don't belong here." Reverend Elijah Moore had seen a lot in his 67 years. He'd marched with his father during the tail ends of the civil rights movement. He'd baptized hundreds in the small river behind his Georgia church. And every election year, he did what black pastors across the South have done for generations. He helped his congregation get to the polls. No campaign signs, no slogans, just faith in action. So when early voting began in 2022, Reverend Moore organized a Souls to the Polls Day, a Sunday, where church members, young and old, would vote together after service. He rented a bus, paid for it out of pocket, handed out bottled water and granola bars, led a prayer before they boarded. "Let our voices be heard, Lord. Let no one be turned away today." But someone didn't like that. Halfway through their ride to the county voting center, they were pulled over not once, but twice. By the time they reached the polling station, there were already 2 police cruisers parked out front. As they stepped off the bus, officers approached Reverend Moore. "Sir, we've had reports of voter intimidation," one said. Moore blinked. Intimidation? Were just going to vote. But they didn't listen. They questioned him for 20 minutes in front of his entire church group. They demanded ID. They wrote down license plates. They warned him not to organize large voting caravans in the future. He wasn't arrested, but the message was clear. You are not welcome here. Some of the elderly members got back on the bus. Others, shaken and afraid, decided not to vote that day. And Reverend Moore, he stood in silence as the police pulled away his Bible, still in one hand, the voter guide in the other. This wasn't 1963, it was 2022. But for a black pastor in Georgia, the ballot box still came with a warning. Kamala Harris could have told her own story. She could have talked about being the daughter of immigrants, about being the first black woman to serve as vice president, about every battle she had to fight just to be heard in rooms that were never built for women like her. But she chose something else. She chose to tell their stories. Maria Alvarez, Reverend Elijah Moore. The single mom denied her vote. The pastor stopped by police. People whose names would never trend on Twitter, whose pain wouldn't make headlines, but whose silence was loud if you were willing to listen. Kamala didn't speak for them. She spoke with them. She took their stories and put them in front of the nation, not as statistics, not as props, but as proof. Proof that the system was broken. Proof that voter suppression wasn't a myth, it was a strategy. Proof that what happened in Texas and Georgia and Ohio wasn't isolated. It was engineered. At rallies, Kamala invoked Maria's name. In Senate hearings, she described what happened to Reverend Moore. In closed-door meetings, she asked lawmakers, "Can you look me in the eye and tell me this is democracy?" And suddenly the issue wasn't theoretical anymore. It was human. It had a face, a name, a story, and Kamala made sure the whole country saw it. She reminded America of something we too often forget. The people most impacted by injustice are usually the ones least able to speak about it. That's why amplifying voices isn't charity, it's duty. When Senator J.D. Vance took the microphone in Indiana, he didn't shout. He didn't pound his fist. He did something worse. He whispered a lie one America has heard too many times. With a calm, calculated tone, he warned that undocumented immigrants were skewing congressional seats, giving states like California more power than they deserved. They're counting illegal aliens in the census, he said. So states like mine, like Ohio, end up with fewer seats in Congress because of California's open borders. The crowd nodded. Fox News ran with it. The talking points spread like wildfire across conservative networks. But here's what Vance didn't say. No undocumented immigrant can vote in federal elections. The U.S. Constitution requires all residents, regardless of status, to be counted in the census. That's been the law since 1790. And yet Vance presented it as if some grand fraud was happening, as if illegals were secretly rigging democracy from the shadows. Why? Because fear works, because outrage sells, because blaming immigrants is easier than fixing broken systems. It's an old trick, one used by segregationists, redliners, and demagogues long before J.D. Vance. A tactic that turns hardworking families into scapegoats, that paints mothers, teachers, caregivers as threats to democracy. And it's not just misleading, it's dangerous. Because when you tell people that others are stealing their voice, they don't go looking for the truth. They go looking for someone to punish. That's how lies become violence. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris called out. Kamala Harris didn't shout. She didn't need to. When J.D. Vance threw out the illegal voter card, the room buzzed with tension. Cable networks ran wild with headlines. But Kamala, she came armed not with rage, but with receipts. Let's be clear, she began steady and razor sharp. The census isn't about citizenship, it's about representation. She pulled out the Constitution, literally, held it in her hands like a shield, and read, "Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, Article 1, Section 2. Then she paused, looked directly at J.D. Vance. "It says persons, not voters, not citizens. Persons." Silence fell across the chamber. "So when you exclude people from being counted, you're not protecting democracy, you're rigging it." She moved from law to math, pulled out Department of Census data, laid out how the number of undocumented immigrants had zero impact on voter turnout in Ohio, revealed how many rural counties were overrepresented and still got more funding than needed. The lie, she said, isn't that people are voting illegally. The lie is that this system ever treated everyone equally. Every senator froze, not because she was loud, but because she was right. She didn't call them liars. She let their own words expose the fraud. She didn't yell racist. She showed how policies rooted in fear disproportionately punished communities of color. Kamala didn't just call the bluff. She flipped the entire poker table. It didn't take long. Just hours after Kamala Harris laid down the truth on live television, the right-wing machine began its counterattack. Fox News ran the headline, "Kamala gaslights the nation." Tucker Carlson called her testimony an emotional performance with no substance. J.D. Vance tweeted, "Kamala just made every illegal immigrant in America feel right at home. Shameful." Over on Truth Social, Trump posted in all caps, "She's lying to protect the illegals. The election was stolen, everyone knows it." The meltdown had begun. But something was different this time. The louder they screamed, the more obvious it became. They weren't angry because she was wrong. They were angry because she was right. You could see it in the tone, the desperation, the way they repeated the same talking points almost verbatim, like a script they were told to memorize. Commentators on MAGA radio didn't address the census clause. They didn't mention Article 1. They ignored the actual data Kamala presented because they couldn't fight facts. So they fought her. They mocked her voice, her background, called her angry and divisive. But this time the usual attacks didn't land because Americans were watching, and many of them had experienced the same silencing, the same dismissal, the same feeling of being counted out of the system that claimed to represent them. Kamala's words struck a nerve, and MAGA world started to panic. They could sense the shift, not just in headlines, but in public sentiment. People weren't just listening, they were sharing, commenting, mobilizing. And when truth becomes louder than propaganda, that's when fear starts to show. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about truth and the people who refused to apologize for telling it. For decades, Black women in American politics were told to tone it down, to smile more, to be respectable. But Kamala Harris didn't play by those rules. And Jasmine Crockett, she burned the rule book altogether. These weren't women waiting for permission to speak. They were speaking because silence had become betrayal. And when Kamala dropped her truth bomb in the Senate, and Jasmine Crockett faced down condescension, racial jabs, and elitist eye rolls in televised hearings, something shifted in America's political atmosphere. They weren't just making arguments. They were dismantling generations of suppression. Kamala brought the calm storm. Jasmine brought the controlled fire. Both brought facts wrapped in fury and didn't apologize for the passion behind their precision. Together, they became the face of a new era where truth is spoken without a trembling voice, where anger is not weakness, it's evidence of injustice, where Black women don't just join the table, they flip it when needed. In one viral exchange, Jasmine stared down a senator who had mocked her degree. "I earned my place here," she said, her voice unwavering. "Did you?" The room fell silent, not out of respect, but from recognition. A new standard was being set. No more emotional labor to soothe the egos of men who weaponized decorum. No more pretending that calm lies were better than loud truths. Kamala and Jasmine weren't the exception. They were the beginning of an unapologetic generation. And in that moment, America saw the most dangerous weapon against injustice is a Black woman who knows her worth, knows her facts, and refuses to be silent. For years, they mocked her for being too emotional, too sharp, too passionate, too unapologetically human. She's angry, she's dramatic. She's not presidential material. That was the favorite MAGA tactic, take emotion and spin it as weakness. But now that same emotion, it's a weapon. And not just for Kamala or Jasmine, but for the millions of Americans who watched, listened, and whispered, "That's exactly how I feel." Because anger, when it's born from truth, doesn't weaken you. It sharpens your words. It breaks through noise. It tells the world, something is wrong and I won't pretend it's fine. And that's what MAGA never understood. They expected fear. They expected shame. They expected women like Kamala to back down, to apologize for the pitch of their voices, the power in their words, the tears in their eyes. But Kamala didn't flinch. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, they turned emotion into evidence. Kamala quoted Article 1 of the Constitution with fire in her voice. Jasmine rattled off state-level voter suppression stats with fury in her delivery. They didn't cry to gain sympathy. They burned because the facts demanded it. And here's the thing, people believed them not in spite of the emotion, but because of it. Emotion made their words real, urgent, undeniable. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't logic alone. It's the truth said loud enough to shake the silence. It started with a 43-second clip. Kamala Harris, standing calm voice, steady gaze, locked on the Senate floor. "This is not a partisan issue. This is a democracy issue." That was it. No screaming, no fist pounding, just raw truth spoken clearly, cleanly, with the kind of weight that hits the soul. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. TikTok, X, Instagram Reels, Reddit, hashtags exploded. Kamala truth, Jasmine Crockett cuts deep, Chad Newsom said. What then came the edits? Dramatic music under Jasmine Crockett's mic drop moment. The side-by-side video of Gavin Newsom holding up voter suppression statistics while Fox anchors tried to look bored but blinked too much. And suddenly the internet wasn't just listening, it was responding. Memes, duets, remixes, teenagers in Kansas quoting Jasmine, Vietnamese Americans in Orange County reposting Newsom's line, "You don't fight lies with silence, you fight it with exposure." Even Fox News, bitter-cornered, aired Kamala's full statement. They tried to contextualize it, they tried to dull it down, but the truth had already escaped the cage, and the people weren't asking for analysis, they were sharing, shouting, stitching, and screaming. Finally, in an age of misinformation, the most radical act is telling the truth clearly. And Kamala, Jasmine, and Newsom, they didn't just go viral. They became unskippable. Kamala Harris didn't plead. She didn't beg. She issued a clear ultimatum: stand or be replaced. The room froze. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Even seasoned lawmakers felt the weight of the words. Stand. Stand for truth. Stand for democracy. Stand for the people who cannot speak for themselves. Or step aside. No flowery rhetoric, no hedging, no excuses. She laid it bare. If you cannot live on the ground, if you cannot bring the message to social media, if you cannot speak from your heart, then you have no place at this table. It wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge, a declaration, a call to arms for the entire Democratic Party. Stop reacting, start leading, or make way for those who will. Kamala's eyes scanned the room. She didn't look for applause. She didn't wait for nods. She was measuring resolve and daring every person to rise to it. Her message resonated far beyond the chamber walls. Across the nation, organizers, volunteers, and activists understood silence is no longer acceptable. The people had seen too much, heard too much, been ignored too much. Stand or be replaced. It was a line that would echo through campaigns, rallies, and even private conversations for months to come. Because Kamala Harris had done what few dared, she forced accountability with truth, courage, and relentless clarity. This was no longer about polished speeches or staged hearings. It was no longer about leaders in expensive suits delivering lines for the cameras. The people were watching, and the people were tired of actors. They didn't want carefully rehearsed performances. They didn't want empty applause lines. They wanted fighters. Fighters who showed up in the rain to march. Fighters who stood in long lines at polling places. Fighters who spoke out when their voices shook. Fighters who told the truth even when it cost them everything. America had seen enough of politicians who smiled on TV but vanished when the struggle got real. Now communities from Georgia to Wisconsin, from Texas to Pennsylvania, were demanding something different. Don't act for us. Fight with us. Kamala's ultimatum had landed, but the echo was louder than even she expected. Ordinary citizens began turning the phrase into a movement, on protest signs, on social media, on church bulletin boards and union halls. This wasn't just about Kamala anymore. It was about every mother, every worker, every student who felt betrayed by a system that protected power instead of people. And in this moment, it became clear the people weren't waiting for heroes. They were choosing their fighters. In the end, there was one truth left standing. No law, no leader, no single election could save democracy. Not Kamala, not Newsom, not Jasmine, not even the best speech ever written. Democracy doesn't survive on speeches. It survives on people. Kamala never asked to be a hero. She didn't step onto that stage to carry America on her back. She stepped forward to light a match. A single spark in a room full of dry kindling. That spark could fade, or it could burn, and the choice is ours. Will we let it fizzle out, lost in the noise of lies and fear? Or will we feed it with courage, with truth, with relentless action? Because here's the final lesson: no one is coming to save us. The only ones who can save democracy are the people willing to fight for it. Kamala was not the fire. She was the first spark. Whether that spark becomes a blaze, that is up to you. The biggest lesson from Kamala's story is this: never wait for a hero. In life, whether it's at work, in your family, or in your community, there will always be injustice, arrogance, or abuse of power. And it's easy to think someone else will step up, someone else will fight back. But democracy, just like our daily lives, isn't saved by someone else. It's saved by the people who choose to act. Sometimes the act is big, standing on a stage and calling out lies. Sometimes it's small, defending a coworker, protecting a friend, or telling the truth when it's easier to stay quiet. The spark of courage doesn't need to be huge. It just needs to be real. And when one person lights that spark, others will follow. So in your own life, don't wait for the hero to appear. Be the spark. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit subscribe right now and join a community that refuses to stay silent in the face of lies, injustice, and corruption. Because here, every story is more than politics. It's a fight for truth, and together we turn sparks into fire. Click subscribe, stand with us, be part of the change.